And thank you, Mark. Yes, the proper protocol will be to launch the disclaimer. Please.
Whoops. Let me just rewind this. There we go.
Disclaimer. The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GANs processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
And now again, we welcome you, Alex, to deliver another beautiful teaching, as you're well known to do. And hopefully we'll ask you some pertinent questions to the subject you're covering today. So I ask everyone to think of a question, or perhaps two, that Alex may entertain, or anyone else may also share in the answer.
Thank you, Mark. Can you just give me 1 second to adjust the screen? I'll be right back.
Okay. All right, we do see your screen here. There must be something else you're adjusting. It seems to be properly centered and the rest of it.
Hello, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I finally found that little glitch. When we transfer screens, we have to readjust the screen. So now that I've done that, I want to thank everybody from the North American community for making this meeting possible. And I want to thank all the people who are tuning in from around the world for making it such a success. We're all in this together, and we've had an absolutely wonderful afternoon so far, and I hope that with this we can add to that. These are the teachings of Marin Tavakoli Kesh, as interpreted by me. My name is Alexandra. I am from Canada. This is the Kesh Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings in Plasma Science. We have graduated to the basic INNERSPACE section. Today's topic is Comatose, and it is August the 28th, 2022. This is the Kesh Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. And as such, this is an assist that I think we're starting to see the dividends. We talk about a peace dividend and many other dividends. I'm starting to see a teaching dividend. A lot of knowledge seekers are graduating to the point where they have more than just a basic understanding. So we've tried to do this a basic INNERSPACE understanding because there are a lot of new knowledge seekers who will be coming, and they will be going through the same confusion that we've gone through for so many years. And so we try to give them a yellow brick road, if you will, without having to go through the thousands and thousands of hours of teaching and dedication that so many have put forward. But as you notice that we really had to focus on the basic Earth Space series because too many are still, shall we say, gravitating to the physical reality and reluctant to move into the plasma reality. And it's normal. It's normal. You want to relate to something that you're familiar with, and try and find some common ground. But the problem with it is, of course, that it's hard to identify the new ground if you don't really understand the old ground. So we did cover this in the basic Earth Space series, and we're really trying to finish off this basic series, but we have to still identify the difference between the physicality and the plasma reality. And so we've been looking for a basic inner space, and I'm hoping that we can find it today, because you see man's tiny little perfect universe is that little red dot in the bottom right hand corner, and the rest of the universe is this elusive plasma reality, and we all want a piece of that pie, and we have to ask ourselves, well, what kind of piece are we looking for? And so when we look at the rest of the universe, we find that it is really very peaceful. And so we see in book number 1, the source, and book number 3, our soul, and there's a link as seen in book number 2, the structure of light. And so how does this happen? How is it connected? And so through these classes, we're trying to be a little bit more specific, because as you can see, that there's a lot of nebulous thought out there. And so this nebulous thought comes from the fact that nebo is sky. And so a nebulous point is somewhere in that sky. And so really, this is the thing that when you question people and how they want that piece of the pie of the physicality, it's hard for them to explain it, because their dreams are really just pie in the sky. And you see that because history keeps repeating. But what it repeats is the boundaries of thought. We have to break those boundaries. And so we think that we're searching for outer space, but how can we do that when we don't know where inner space is? And so we are all, shall we say, discarded as plebeians, members of the general citizenry, or the garbage, if you will. And we know what happens to garbage. You have to throw it away. But when we look at the sun space and the rest of the universe, we find that there's no place to throw this garbage away to. There's no planet called away. There's no star called away. And when we look at all the stars, we find that they are points of light, and our star has a name, and we call it the sun. And so we are in that sphere of reference. And then within that sphere of reference, we've created boundaries, because there is one particularly sentimental pie in that sky, and we call it Earth. And we know where it is because we know our neighbors. And so it is between Venus and Mars. Okay. And where exactly is that? Well, it's there. It's somewhere is there. And wherever there is, we find that we brought a lot of stuff with us. But the thing is that this stuff was here before we came. And so these are not part of us. These are part of the Earth space, the Earth space details. And there's so many of these details. And the ones that are really important for us, of course, is the amino acid structure, the carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen. And then, of course, the medium that we use to exchange information is sodium, magnesium, potassium, and calcium. And then we look at the product of the Earth space, which is copper, zinc, and iron. And we find that also that is a product of us. So in fact, when we look at what we've been trying to determine what exactly is Earth space and what exactly is outer space, we find that what we thought was outer space was beyond the magnetosphere, which actually went as far as moon space. So we find that the range from our crust, which is our biosphere range, out to the moon space range, all of that is part of our Earth's target range. So it's a good thing this target is so large, because we are not the best target shooters, are we? We have to be a little bit more skillful in our target shooting. And so what we've been able to do is we've been able to come into this atmosphere and create this man space. And so then we find that there's an overlapping, that our man space is created the same way as the Earth space is created, but it's within the Earth space. So our space and the Earth space is a common space, but we are the new arrivals. We find that the Earth space had to be here first. You had to have a space to arrive to a destination point. And in fact, we were even preceded by the vertical people. And you can see that there's so many of them. So we are really just like Christopher Columbus. You know, we think we've discovered something, and we find that the only thing is we discovered is things that we don't know and everybody else kind of did, including the bumblebees, because they were also part of the Earth space. And so one of the things about Earth space is that we find that it can do quite well without man space. In fact, if we remove man space, we find that Earth space will flourish. So this is really a sad thing to say, you know. Are we welcome, you know, or are we you know, are we garbage? Were we discarded from another place and came here? Is the Earth space the garbage dump? And so, you know, we're trying to establish this relationship. And the thing is, though, the universe keeps moving, the sun keeps moving, and the Earth keeps moving. And not only that, but in the process of moving, it changes the seasons. And so when we look at the summertime, we see that, you know, everybody's hanging around, and, you know, we don't have to do anything. Everybody just shows up. So we are the Johnny come latelys. But in the wintertime, everybody leaves, and we're still here. Even the bears leave, they go into hibernation. What about the plants? Well, they go into dormancy. And we know that they will come back in the summertime. So what's going on here? You know, we are still animated. And so what is it? Is everybody else in a state of suspended animation? Well, we can understand that because we go into a state of suspended animation every night. We call it sleep. But what happens if that sleep is kind of extended? We call that a coma. And so that's what we want to talk about today. Are we looking at some similarities here between, say, these 5 types of suspended animation? Everything from hibernation to coma. Is that what a coma is? You go into hibernation, and why would you do that? And where exactly do you go? And so today we want to investigate some reasons here, because remember, we know where Earth space is, but we don't know where outer space is. So what we do know is that there is a relationship. And so the relationship becomes fundamental to everything that we're talking about. So when we look at the fundamental principle of the Trinity, we find that it's 2 plasmatic fields. and there's an interaction and there's a relationship, and one field is stronger than the other. And so energy is transferred from one to the other, and there are rules to follow. And so when we find that these elements on Earth space, the basic elements are basic. That's why they're called atoms. They're uncut. So the relationship is like a proton and an electron. And then from there, we can either have decay or creation. So when we look at the decay, what we find is that now we introduce a neutron, which is even more dense. And when the neutron decays, it decays into an atom structure. And in that process, it releases a PM tick. And not just one PM tick, but a bunch of PM ticks, because these are all energy packs. And so the one thing that we have to understand is that the release of the PM tick in the process of the ray creation is not the same PM tick that is traveling through the universe. We are just representing an energy exchange. But to say specifically that that particular energy, you know, like in a, say, a car race, the cars have numbers. Okay, so say number 32. Is it number 32 or is it number 68? Which one is it? And so it all depends on the conditions. But the thing is that one pack is coming and one pack is going, and one pack is in the universe and one pack is in man space. Okay, so we find that each of us have different energy feeding packs feeding us, which is where we get our individuality, what we call the spice of life. And the strength of this information that we get is all dependent on the gradient. And so we find on Earth that things are based on density. So the greater the density, then the higher the gradient. And so this is how the universe is created. It all exists from energy. So in order to exist from energy, and then it has to come together. And so it comes together in a field, which we've seen in the universal order of creation of matter. So we see three fields coming together, the matter, the dark matter, and the antimatter. And so energy is always in motion, and we see that things are working always in combination. And so that's the thing that we have to understand. What we are seeing is just an illusion. That's not the cause of what we're seeing. The cause of what we're seeing are the feeding dimensions. And so we discussed feeding dimensions where we see one feeding dimension and another feeding dimension. And in mathematics, we could say that that's two. But in the plasma science, we find that we still keep the first one and we still keep the second one. What we add to it is a feedback dimension. And we could say that that is a third dimension. We could say, but we don't have to say specifically that it is only a third dimension. There could be other dimensions. And then we say we are not part of any of these three dimensions. We're in a fourth dimension. Well, which dimension is that? And what is the construct of that dimension? And so this is the difference between when we say what is an Earth space dimension and what is an inner space dimension. So when we look at the basic construct, we find that the rules are the same. The two feeding dimensions create a third feedback dimension. And so that creates a dimension. And if we look at the cup of life, and we say the one cup, and it's created from the zinc plate and the copper coil in one dimension. And when we say the one dimension, we talk about the field strength. And then when we look at the nano-coated copper coil, it's in a higher field strength. So that is a different dimension. And so there's a relationship between the magnetical and gravitational field forces within that cup. And although we can't see it, we see the product of it. So if we say that we have CO2 GANs or calcium GANs, zinc GANs or copper GANs, water GANs and amino acid GANs, that's not what we have. That's the product. That product was created. That is the third dimension. That's the third feedback dimension of the first two feeding dimensions. And so if we say the first two feeding dimensions, is that like a twin cup where you have one is a feeding cup and the other is a feedback cup? And how can you tell which one it is? And so that is a subject we're going to talk about later. But there is a difference when we look at the cups of life. They are not twin cups. One is an emotional cup and one is a physical cup. And if we want to keep them unique, then we have to spread the fields apart so that we don't have a non-visible connection, or that we have a weaker field strength. And so in the process, we can extend that to the 5 cups, where we now introduce also the cup of the soul. So the cup of the soul, the cup of motion, and the cup of physicality, well, that kind of represents our man space. And then the cup of the earth, well, that represents our earth space. And so our representation is one, and the earth space representation is one. Then we have the inertia cup, which is the third dimension, and then all together that creates a plasma field. But that's only one field. So the equation is incomplete because we've completed the equation in the one dimension, but now we're in another dimension, aren't we? Because we said we're none of these 3 dimensions. We are in other dimensions, and this is only one field. So what does that mean? Well, that means that we have created this field by bringing the PM ticks together and converging in a field that contains principal, transition, and convergence matter. And so that creates a gravitational feedback. And that gravitational feedback is represented in the inertia. So the magnetical feeding and the gravitational feedback creates another field of inertia. Well, this is fine when you're talking about the principal matter. And as we're still in the basics, then the basics are the plasma magnetical field forces are represented by attraction and repulsion. And we call it gravitational and magnetical. And so one is the feeding and one is the feedback. And so in the plasma rule, where the higher strength feeds the weaker strength, we're only seeing 2 dimensions. We're not seeing the other dimensions. And so in the other dimensions, when 2 forces come together, then they create a basic field. And not only, this is only one part of the equation. And in this part of the equation, we find that when we started with a PM tick and then created a field of which we participate in, this is the universal harvesting method. And the universal harvesting method is a self-enhancement method. And so what is wrong with our physicality, and why do we want to stop referencing it? Because it's a loose harvesting reference. It's a self-consumption. In other words, in the process of consuming others, we also consume ourselves. Because what we are doing is we are harvesting from a weaker source, where the universal harvesting is available to all. And we can understand that because we all cater to this school of illusion. And we find that, we produce a lot of garbage in physicality, a lot of garbage in our thought. And so ironically, one man's garbage is another man's gold, and a lot of people profit of that. And so it's a lot better for me to lie, cheat, and steal, and I make more profit. But, when we do it that way, then we forget what the source is. And so we just say, well, we are looking at the profit from the products, but, there's no reference field. So in other words, when we started back in the basic teaching series, we talked about destruction and what does that mean? And so we said, well, when two forces come together, we can question and say, well, when two forces come together, is it destruction or is it creation? But the fact of the matter is the destruction is a kind of creation. It's questionable whether it's desirable. The debate rages. However, it's something that when you look at the rest of the universe, there is no debate. So we really have to ask ourselves the question, in our process of creation, what kind of creation are we creating? And is it a shining example to the universe? Well, I don't know. When I look at the sun, I can see that it is shining. It is very bright. So what we find is we are literally energy binding because we're doing this at the expense of others. We're double crossing and we're choosing the wrong gateways, the wrong reference fields. And as such, we are manifesting something. And so what we're manifesting is what we talked about last week, the Biosphere eating rule, where the higher strength eats the weaker strength. So the question then becomes, if we are eating the weaker strength, then are we subject to that possibility also? In other words, if we are eating something, do at some point we become the eaten? And so we are in a form of illusion where we say, no, that's not me. That's not me. That conflict, no, that's not me. Something else is me. And so we become conflict driven. Well, that's not how the plasma works. The plasma has different states of energy. And these energy states are different by at least an order of magnitude. So, such as in the first cup, we've seen that the nanocoating was at least one order of magnitude, at least one order of magnitude. Didn't say how many, but the rule also is that the higher energy state feeds the lower energy state. So this is all part of natural creation or natural decay, right? But there's another way, and that is to be catalytic or non-consuming. And we could say, this is very representative of the sun, isn't it? Because the sun comes up every day and it's always giving. It's just that things are a little problem on this planet. And with the way we transfer energy, we always seem to want to transfer energy at the lowest energy state. But what we find that if we can do this at a higher energy state, then the transfer rate is also higher. And it is higher by many orders of magnitude. And so the basic rule is that the plasma field can absorb energy, but not all energies, because the plasma is also barrier of fields. Well, how can it absorb and how can it be a barrier at the same time? Well, there are other rules, there are unseen rules. And so plasma is bound to the ethos of the universe. And the ethos of the universe, well, how does that affect manifestation? So we find that the plasma feeding leads to a manifestation. And any time the two fields come together and they form another, that is a manifestation. But you see, the fact is that that manifestation can be non-tangible or tangible, non-visible or visible. So then we find that there's a plasmatic reality and a physical reality. And always the physical reality is a product of the plasma reality. And so what drives this plasma reality? Does the physical reality drive the plasma reality? So we have to introduce another dimension, and that's the emotion of presence. And so we find that that creates another manifestation point. And so that's another dimension. And so now we're starting to understand how we can target a certain field and how we can launch to that field. In other words, how do we create motion and how do we make decisions? And so there's a difference between this physical matter state, which you can touch and see, and this plasmatic matter state, which you cannot touch or cannot see. However, one is the product and one is the feeding. And all three work together as a unit in one dimension. And we are none of those three dimensions. We are the product of other dimensions. And so this was the motivating factor because we were part of the sun space. And within the sun space, we found that there are different planets, and all these planets have a name. And so there was a reference point between Mars and Earth. And so we had to make this reference. And so what we found is that if we look at the relationship between the Earth and the Sun, it's the same relationship as an electron to a proton, where the Earth would be the electron. And then if we looked at the relationship between the Mars and the Sun, we found that that relationship is the same as an electron to a proton, with Mars being the electron. And then if we look at the relationship between Mars and Earth, well, Mars is still the electron, but now the Earth is no longer an electron. Now the Earth is a proton. But clearly, Mars, Earth, and the Sun are of different sizes. So in other words, what we've said here is that Earth as a proton is not the same size as Sun as the proton. And then Mars as the electron is not the same size as the Earth as the electron. So what we find is that this relationship is overlapping. And so it becomes quite transparent that these fields are overlapping. And the question isn't about the planet space, it's about us, man space. Is this me? Is it the reason we came to Earth was because we didn't go to Mars and we didn't go to the Sun? So are we the product of our neighbors? So are we actually the product of the combination of the fields of Mars and the fields of the Sun? And so when we look to the sky and we see that the sky is translucent, and yet we can look through the sky and see that it's transparent, And then we can look through the Earth in the form of a window and see that we can look right through that window. And so we start to realize that what we see is not exactly what we are. The thing is that in the atmosphere, we find that we had a plasmatic air. And it started with a plasmatic nitrogen. The number one component of our atmosphere is nitrogen. It's pushing 80%. And when we combine the hydrogen, which is very magnetical, we find that we produce NH4. But what's missing? Carbon and oxygen are missing. And so where is this carbon and oxygen, and what is the importance of it? So first of all, if we add the carbon and oxygen to, we create this amino acid. So the amino acid has all four of these components: carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen. But the thing is that we have a plasmatic nitrogen and a plasmatic hydrogen, and from that we created a plasmatic amino acid. And so it was the plasmatic substrate which created the physicality. And so we do have this physicality where actually we can measure the nitrogen, hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen as elements on the periodic table of elements. But in the plasma reality, we don't have that. We have things that are working in combination. And they have purposes. So we find that the nitrogen, as being part of the environment of Earth space, is a facilitator. And we already said that hydrogen is magnetical. And so therefore the oxygen needs to be gravitational. So somehow, some way there's a connection, because we all know that carbon is solid, just like silicon is solid. But we can see through glass, and we can see through the atmosphere, and the atmosphere does have carbon dioxide. So we find this amino acid affinity is part of the feeding conversion system. And so when we look at the structure of the Earth, we find that it has a magnetical gravitational relationship, and that energy is coming out and coming in. It's coming out magnetically and coming in gravitationally. And then we find that elements or products on this planet also have the same thing, but in the situation with concrete poles, we have removed the form. And so we have a solid with a hollow core. But when we look at the bamboo poles, we didn't create the form, but the form was, we see the form artifact, and it has a hollow core. So something is feeding, and what it is feeding to has to be a maggrav. So the bamboo pole, the concrete pole, and the Earth and its poles are all magravs, and something is feeding it, and we know what's feeding it. It's the PM ticks. And so we have the transmission and transition of energy, and then we come to our point of existence, the transmutation. And so in order to do this, there has to be some kind of crossover from the plasmatic reality to the physical reality. And so either in the plasmatic reality becomes non-visible, and in the physical reality, well, it can also be non-visible. And so this becomes a little bit confusing. So we find that when we have a balanced maggrav, that maggrav is transparent. So there are factors that create the tangibility and visibility that are beyond what we see. And so what is this beyond what we see? And where is it? It's somewhere in between, isn't it? And where exactly is that? Well, it's somewhere. And so a good detective always knows that you don't just look at the evidence, you have to look at the absence of evidence. So we've mentioned that many times. And so this in-between space is what's missing. And so to add to our electron-proton relationship, we find that with respect to many atoms, we have different number of electrons that follow paths, which we call orbitals. And if we have an orbital around the Earth, we have satellites that follow those orbitals. We call them satellites in orbit. And we are also satellites because we have our own existence. But we are on the Earth space and we have our own biosphere. And so we are the Biosphere Satellites as part of the Earth space biosphere. So there's a relationship there. And so we say that, you know, we can see the sky, but we can actually kind of see it. It's not exactly solid, is it? It's kind of translucent. But at night, we can see right through. And how far away can we see? Well, as far as the eye can see. And so what that means is we are magnetical. We are magnetical. So I have to introduce, because we're talking about being comatose, I have to introduce two words. And one is destrudo, the destructive impulse. It was introduced by a psychoanalyst named Eduardo Weiss in 1935. And this is a reference to the energy of death instinct, energy of death. Destrudo is the energy of the self-destructive impulse. It is the antonym of libido. Libido is the urge to create, and destrudo is the urge to destroy. And as we said, well, destruction is a form of creation. So, you know, which creation are you? Well, another word, mortido, a death instinct. Imagine that. And this term is used in psychology. It's the energy of death instinct. And the thing about mortido is that it can result in self-harm or suicide. And so this becomes a problem and a consideration when we talk about things where we've come to experience death. So for instance, there is such a thing as a near-death experience. And so what caused this near-death experience? Was this an attempted suicide? Or was this just some kind of attempted self-harm? And as a self-harm attempt, would we say that it was a failure? And therefore, this near-death experience was a very short term. Now, this near-death experience is different from sleep because we know that sleep is just during the night, but a near-death experience is kind of has no real time frame. But the thing is that you got hurt, and you weren't awake, and then you got awake as you were able to heal back to a certain level. So that becomes a near-death experience. As this is just a basic class on inner space, we're not going to go any further with that. But what we are going to talk about is soldiers of fortune and their PTSD, which is traumatic stress disorder. And what happens here is that too many of these soldiers who are well skilled to protect themselves are in the process of protecting themselves, harming others. And so the question becomes, for the soldier who pulls the trigger to kill someone else's child, how will he react to his own child? And what's the difference? And so we find that sometimes they can't tell the difference, because if they're killing someone else, then what's the difference? They might as well kill themselves. And so you find these soldiers who are armed to the teeth, highly skilled, and they survive fierce battles, but they can't survive the battle with themselves, and they commit suicide. And so this self-harm becomes a success. But then there are others that we want to talk about today. These are comatose patients. And so we find these comatose patients kind of have a near-death experience. And so it's usually caused by an accident or something, let's just say. And the sleep, if you will, has an indefinite period. So what we're going to say is that we know the sleep is during the night. A near-death experience would be a little bit longer. When a comatose, well, there's no prescribed duration. And so the thing is that when we go to sleep, when we have a near-death experience, or when we go into a coma, we're actually still alive. So how is that possible? So we need to check the evidence. And so there's one other factor that we'd like to bring. And because when we talk about harming others, there are those who we say are deranged or dysfunctional. The summary of that really is that they are disconnected. We know that they're disconnected, because how can you make a difference between harming others and protecting yourself? You know, the soldier of fortune was harming others, and he couldn't differentiate between harming others and harming himself. Whereas those who are dysfunctional harm others, but they don't harm themselves. So in other words, what they do is they operate through proxies. So they themselves, could you say that they are comatose? Or would you say that they are brain dead? Or are they asleep? And so is that unfair? Is it unfair to say that someone who is in a coma, you know, it's as if they're asleep for an extended period of time, or someone who is not asleep is brain dead? Is that fair? It is fair insofar as in all cases, what we're talking about is some kind of dysfunctionality. And so what that means is that there's a disconnect. If there is a disconnect, then where's the connection? Right? If there's a disconnect, then there has to be a connection. So let's look at the connection. So what we know about the connection is that we can go to sleep and remain alive in a state of suspended animation, a kind of temporary hibernation, if you will, right? A temporary change of the season from day to night, if you will. And we maintain this connection because when we wake up in the morning, we come back. But we all know that we go somewhere. So wherever we went, are we saying that where we go is back to nature? Or when we come back, is that back to nature? Or can we say that we are connected to nature, and then we can go back and forth. So when we look at the product in our GANS bottles, which first of all, the bottle is glass and is transparent, and then we can see the GANS inside, but more importantly, there's a hole in the GANS, and it too is transparent. And so that becomes the product. So what we're not seeing, besides not seeing the glass because it's transparent and not seeing the hole because it's transparent, we can see right to the other side of the GANS. And what we don't see is what the GANS is doing in terms of field strength. And what we don't see are the fields that created this product. All what we're seeing is byproducts, a feeding byproduct, and then the feedback. So where the glass is feeding to the GANS is feeding to the hole in the GANS, and this is all somehow connected. And so we find that there's a creation and decay on the side of creation. And there's a creation decay on the side of decay. Because we said that destruction is a form of creation. But does it have to be destruction? So if you're looking at a creation to destruction relationship, that is only 2 dimensions. But if you're looking at a creation dimension, we find that we have a neutron, electron, proton, and a PM tick on the side of creation. And we have a neutron, electron, proton, PM tick on the side of the decay. And that there is a connection between the two, and that connection is unseen. And so this is the point. Now we know that we are the product of other fields. So what we are in terms of Earth space is not what we are. And so when we look at the 2 rainbows, we know that there's an inside rainbow and an outside rainbow, but there's this nebulous field that's in between. And this is what we're doing. This is where we put the pea stone. And so the pea stone is us, because that's who we are. When we look at our man space, regardless of which field we're operating in, we have a radiant field, and that is our plasmatic manifestation. And that plasmatic manifestation may materialize into a physical manifestation. Either way, there's a feeding radiance and a feedback radiance. And where does that come from? So to maintain this field of energy, there has to be some kind of feeding field, that man space field inside. Just like you're inside looking out through the window, there's an inner space spectrum. And we're all different. We're all unique. We all create the spice of life, and we all have our dynamic plasma boundary. And so we have reference points where we have ray creation, we have ray emission, and we have ray absorption. And this is all done at light speed. Well, we didn't say which light, because there is a plasmatic light and there's a physical light. There's a plasmatic spectrum, there's a physicality spectrum, and there's a connection. And we call this connection the covalent bond. And this covalent bond is governed by the inner space, because we can't see what is maintaining this physicality. So in other words, when we look at the rotating hemispheres of the Earth and we see that they are rotating in opposite directions, but we look at the Earth and it's rotating together as one. so one north space, one south space gives us Earth space, and that's more than two, isn't it? Because we have everything there, including the vertical people and the horizontal people, and we're kind of stuck in between, aren't we? And so we're trying to figure out when we go into our launch pad in Linz and we jump from seat to seat, and we see that not only do we cross over from the departure lounge and then cross over from the arrival lounge, but we remain connected. We remain connected. And so, what are we connected to? So we're connected to inner space, aren't we? This connection is our flight simulation that we go through every night. This connection is how we exist in a comatose state, because we're still alive, but we're brain dead. So wait a second. If we're physically alive, but brain dead, and if the physicality is the domain of the soul of the body, and the brain is the domain of the soul of the man, and if the soul of the man leaves, what happens to the brain? Is the brain dead? Well, how can the brain be dead? Because the brain is keeping the body alive. So there's something going on here. And so this desire to stay connected and head back to nature, it really doesn't matter. Nature is trying to tell us that there's more evidence to take into account. If you are connected to yourself, then you are connected to your neighbor. And the neighbor has to be connected to themselves. And they are connected to you. And what is the limitation of this connection? So we find that there's an energy transfer between the brain and the body, and there's a limitation on the brain, which we talked about, the supragranular layer. But somehow we say that in a comatose condition, we're brain dead, but the body is alive. So there is a physical destination state, that's the alive body. But there's somehow a dynamic transfer state from this deadness of the brain. Where does this energy come from? So we find that really the soul of the man, that's the essential you, that's you. And the soul of the man is interacting between the plasmagen state and the mattergen state. These are plasma states. So the soul of the body, well, what's that? That's the surrogate you. That's the interaction between the plasmagen state and the environment state, the mattergen, the matter state, the small m matter state, the inertia. The interaction is the inertia. So now when we're looking at the soul sequencing, we say, well, the soul of the sun plus the soul of the earth attracts the soul of the man. Okay, so that's the essential you. And then the soul of the earth plus the soul of the man attracts the soul of the body. So that's a surrogate you. So now the soul of the earth plus the soul of the body manifests the physicality of the body. That's the product of you. That's not you. So now we have a better understanding of the soul of the earth relationship. So when we look at the earth space and we see the physicality of the body, and so when we look at the body and we say, well, that body is asleep, or that body is comatose, or that body is brain dead, and that's not a commentary. All of these are somehow defying the universal laws, because what they are is a direct drive to self-harm or suicide. So when we can't commit that suicide, then we find that there's a governor. That's the soul of the body. The soul of the body governs the physicality of the body. And the soul of the body is inside. It has to be inside. And the question then becomes, during the time that the body is comatose, does the soul of the body leave? And so, for simplicity purposes, we can say that there's two possibilities. One possibility is that we know that there's a soul in all the cells of the body, and they obviously produce the organs of the body, and so there's a soul in the organs as well. So all of these souls of the cells and organs take care of the operation of the physicality of the body. We could say that. Or we could say that the coordination of the physicality of the body is so complex, with over 70 trillion cells in our body, that we need a governor, the soul of the body, to be the governor. And I think at this point in time, I would say that that is more likely. And the reason I say that is because when you are tending to do self-harm, and for whatever reason, it indicates some kind of disconnect, some kind of dysfunctionality. And the reason that this dysfunctionality becomes accentuated is because we cannot tell the difference between what is part of us and what is us. And the reason we can't tell the difference is because when we look at the physicality, we're looking at the product of the reality. So if we decide that I can kill my neighbor's child, how can I tell the difference between my neighbor's child and my child? Because both are the product of the plasmatic reality. And if I become so dysfunctional that I do that, and then the inherent loss of energy as a result of doing that, then the one step further is the self-harm, the near-death experience, the coma, or you go to the extra step, the suicide. So what we do know is that we can reverse a coma. So the thing is that we're only looking at one side of the equation, and that is the soul of the body and the physicality of the body as one. What we need to look at is what's missing, the ethos, which transcends the limitations of nuclear science. So if life wants to live, which is part of creation, what we call the libido, that has to take into account morality, compassion, and courage. And if you have no compassion for your neighbor, how can you have compassion for yourself? It's the same thing, isn't it? So if we treat our neighbors as garbage, then what are we? So we are actually what we see is a reflection. We are not what we see. We are what we emit. And so when we're looking at this giant dandelion, which is 1 meter tall, what we don't see is what the dandelion is, the energy fields behind it, and that's the point. So what we're saying is that if we are looking at only the economy and not taking into account the ecology, then this is a failure of our pursuit of happiness. And so man has never launched a rocket into outer space because he's failed to identify inner space. And so we find that our physicality is not us. So whether we're launching or landing to this Earth space, that's not us, because we are inherently peaceful. That's us. And so we are the product of what we give our time and attention to. And if we don't give our time and attention to that on our Earth space, then we are in conflict. And so this is the point. When we're looking at explaining to someone what is plasma, just explain to them it's a kind of energy state. And as we learn about this, we can understand our Earth space, because we really don't understand our Earth space. Would we treat it so badly, like someone else in a war? Or are we now finding our inner space? And this is important because too many of us go through life without answering these questions. And these are the questions of, well, hello, these are the questions of creation. So we find that there's an inner space of our bodies. And so all we are is a feedback of another feedback, isn't it? And so what is the driving force? And so we find that there's an emotional energy manifestation that is driving this, and is driving this through the inner space of our bodies, which is non-tangible. And so this is where the vision enhancement unit comes in to facilitate PTSD recovery. Why? Because it reconnects to the default pathway, which is peace. This is the universal harvesting for soul enhancement and spirit enhancement, right? And this is the same way that we assist those who are comatose. And if we can assist those who have PTSD, and if we can assist those who are comatose, then by God, we can assist those who are brain dead. And to understand that manifestation and materialization are two different words, and they don't mean the same thing. So when we're looking at materialization, we're talking about Earth space. But when we're talking about manifestation, we're talking about inner space. And at this point now, we understand how we're bringing science and the soul of man together for peace, right? Peace is the product. So the science community has a responsibility, and the spiritual community has a responsibility. Come together and add to the knowledge and affect the rate of change. These are all overlapping relationships, all overlapping relationships of the same thing, a magnetical gravitational balance, what we call a macro. And so we see these overlapping field states between Earth space and inner space. This is where science and the soul meet. And we are in this biosphere of peace. We are part of this biosphere, isn't it? Because we have reached an existential crisis. We have to harvest the plasma energy of the plasma universe. And so we can do this. Because now we know that the peace dome is our inner space dome. So the peace dome is the inner space dome within the Earth space. And we are part of both. We are participants as man space. So now we can unlock this gateway, unlocking the inner space of our Earth body. And we can start to understand that the debate between peace and prosperity and the alternative, war and poverty, is something for the debate of only those who are brain dead. And that's not a commentary, that's just a scientific fact, that we are limited by man-made laws and unlimited by the universal role of man. We have overlapping boundaries, and we need to understand which is which. And when we understand which is which, then we can target towards the peace, right? Because nothing that we've seen so far has any proof of outer space. We only come to the point now where we're starting to see the inner space, and we know it. There's a proof. There's a proof of that. So how can you have a proof of that? Well, look at the preference and sentimentality. First of all, you were born. Second of all, you were born using their system. And you were born into inner space. And that inner space is in Earth space. That was your target. So if we want to leave Earth space, does that mean we're completing the round trip from where we came from? Or is that the beginning of a new trip? And so this becomes an exciting journey. Because really where we've arrived, we are preoccupied with the pursuit of problems. And the reason for that is because the solutions are absent, because the evidence is absent. So all we see are the Earth space problems, because we don't have this awareness of the inner space. And so if we get this awareness of inner space, then we can start to deal with the outer space problems. We are in the post-June the 6th, 2022 era, where we can now make choices. And so we understand that the Earth space is strictly a manifestation point of what we call materialization. And the transparency point is our Earth space, our inner space, which is part of Earth space. It's also part of man space, isn't it? So now we have a point of reference. And this is where we have to pull everybody out of a coma. And we can, and we've done that successfully in 30 days or less. And that's a fact. The Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science is calling all Earth space patriots. There is a World Peace Treaty, and sign it. Sign it with a pen. Show the physicality. Back it up by signing it with your heart and mean it. Because Earth has life with no boundaries, and the plasma science has life with no limitations. And so what we're looking at is the earthbound physical and emotional atmospheric transformation through the peace dome of the inner space dome, the transmutation from transparency to manifestation. The universal refugium of the nebulous life of the universal community causes us to relearn the overlapping universal inner space of freedom. And so we're talking about the inner space awareness to transcend the man-made boundaries of thought. Plasma science needs to be delivered in exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the outer space age. Thank you all for listening. That's the end of the lesson.
Thank you, Alex, once again, for your continuing work here.
Yes, please go to the baggage checkout and
I just want to thank all those who joined the Kesh American Knowledge team this week, and I've taken a few names out of the Telegram: Ivana, Giovanni, Carla, Louise, Raphael, Paula, and Kathleen. We welcome you. I know Jacko will have to sort it out to make sure these are all actual people and not bots, but as I said earlier, we've grown a little bit over the previous period. Now, I did find an invite link, which I'll put into the chat, and that's for the American Knowledge team, Kesh American Knowledge team. I don't think I was going to ask if anyone's here for the first time, but I don't see any new names. I think we're all have been here at least once before. If there's anyone here for the first time and you'd like to announce yourself, please do so. Okay, and now the part we've all been waiting for is the Q&A, or something you'd like to discuss. I know Micah had a question earlier and I sort of missed it. Does anyone have any information on the Plasma Wellness Center in Italy? It is open for people to book appointments, ? Anyone? We had Stefania here. I don't know if she's still here. Yes.
Can you repeat the question? Hi, good evening, everyone.
Good evening. Micah was just wondering, Micah from up north of the United States, if any information on the Plasma Wellness Center in Italy, it is open, is it open for people to book appointments? Anything you want to share on that, Stefania?
I mean, as far as I know, the doctor, they have to give the confirmation to go in August, in September, to the links again for already been once. And there's a possibility they're gonna go again after the 15th of September for the transmutation flight. Regarding the news of the center, I know they things is in progress, but I don't know, definitely is not open yet.
Okay, well, we know that Rome was not built in one day, was it? And these things all take time to put together and to get the proper certificates and everything else you need, and probably a few other things you didn't think of that you need to take care of. But it sounds like it's a beautiful work in progress, as many of the things and happenings around the Kesh Foundation are. Thank you, Stefania.
You're welcome.
Would anyone like to bring up a question for Alex? I was going to ask Dean while you're writing your question down, or perhaps just thinking one up. I see Dean is here. Is there anything he'd like to report, or are you on holiday? Anything you could possibly share out of the Lynch Center, Dean? if you're able to hear me. I'm not sure if you're away from the mic or multitasking. Just sitting in the brook with your feet, perhaps. We did play your tribute to Mario, just to let you know. I think you joined right after that. But we did do a small tribute to Mario for all his work and so on and so forth. And we know he's here. He's connected to all of us, as we all are connected.
So while people are thinking, I'd like to add a point, if I may, please. We are approaching the end of the basic INNERSPACE series, and the whole purpose of it is to know exactly where that is, so that we can make a reference to where outer space is. So it's fairly obvious that that is going to be the next series. And the point I want to make is that I have started a new batch of GANs production, and I am absolutely astounded at the amount of GANs that is being produced. It is far more than I have produced in the past. I was happy with the rate of production in the past, and I'm just doing it on a small basis. I only have the one reactor going, but I mean, it's raining GANs. And so the thing about it is that the question comes as to what causes this. So if the GANs production is the product, then what is causing the amount of GANs to, I'm going to say, significantly increase from what we had before? And so if we look at the plasma fields, and we find that the higher strength feeds the weaker strength, there are two impulses. One is that the higher strength is higher, or the weaker strength is weaker. And I'm not talking about in relationship to each other, but in relationship to themselves. So what has changed, shall we say, over the last year? And so one of the things we notice is that things have accelerated. So for instance, we have a large military confrontation, and that other military confrontations, points of conflict, are percolating and opening it up. And in that process, not only are we having injuries and self-harm, but we're having death. And it's breathtaking. The number of lives that are lost is absolutely breathtaking. And so really the thing is that it's really not the fault of the, shall we say, the soldier who's doing the killing, when the other party is providing the cannon fodder. And so a new strategy has developed where there is no advancement in the military position, to just sit and wait for the sacrifice to be delivered. And there really aren't words to describe this lack of compassion. And it's a lack of compassion on both sides. And we need to end these wars. And the thing is that if you are sending your soldiers in to be slaughtered, and you know that in advance, then that shows a distinct lack of compassion. And that's where the problem is. And so we find that the need is greater. The need for peace is greater as a result of that. So we say that some people are comatose, I know the Comatose will say that they're brain dead, but some people are just living and walking brain dead, because that is a heinous violation of universal law. Heinous violation of universal law. And so there will be a reckoning. But in the meantime, we have to carry on and deliver peace on this planet. And so I realize that the GANS production is a reflection of that.
Stefania is saying, happened to me as well. I made quantity of GANs like never before. I have never made so much GANs like this last production. Now, Alex, are you making honey, cheese, butter, lamb, potatoes, or was it one of the four Ganses, the Mr. Cohen, perhaps, or was it?
No, I'm still in the basic learning. I'm just producing very much a cup of life, because that one is the one that's producing the emotional reinforcement. And Randy mentioned that last week as well. He was producing an enormous amount of GANs. So we now have corroboration from many sources. So if we want confirmation, well, there's your confirmation. But the thing is that my confirmation comes from a plasmatic feeding. Stefania's confirmation comes from her plasmatic feeding, and Randy's confirmation comes from his feeding. And this is the point. So these plasma fields are all interacting. And so when the question was posed earlier, which field is doing the interacting, and the answer is they're all connected. So now what we're having is, because of our awareness, we can no longer be bystanders, because once you become aware, you become responsible. And so you cannot not do something. You cannot just sit there like a stone. So you have to become very active in that regard, because we are all part of the universal community. And there's another factor which we can't see, and this is what I want to mention, is that the universal community is having the same problems as we are. And so they themselves are responding to our response, right? So if our response is a feeding response, the universal community has a feeding response also. And so now you see how we're starting to transcend the dimensions. And so what is gratifying, as I said at the beginning, when we go through all these basic teachings, is that soon we will stop with the basics and advance even more. But we understand that, right now, we are maybe representing 5% of the world's population, and we need to increase that. And as we do, and every day as we do, the field strength becomes stronger. And as the life on this planet becomes more harsh, well, guess what the plasma rule is? The plasma with the higher strength feeds the plasma with the weaker strength. So the weaker we get, the stronger we get. That's the rule. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, and I just wanted to, we seem to have a response earlier from the mother of the child that we elevated, and she writes, "Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, everyone. I love the knowledge seekers and our soul family. Thank you for your care and concern to support our son. I want to say he has been happier and more relaxed today than in a long time. and has not been biting his fingers like he had been doing for weeks. We're going to continue the suggested protocols for him of drinking, spraying, and breathing the zinc and the CO2 with a bit of magnesium GANs. Her husband had CO2 and zinc GANs prepared with magnesium already for us. So I believe we have all the GANs we need. The power of prayer and love and soul is unlimited, and I know our son is receiving the blessings of your intentions. Thank you with my whole heart and soul. I will keep KF updated as he progresses. My heart is encouraged because we are already seeing improvement. I love you all so much. Thank you. Now, Micah is asking in the chat, what is the new method of producing GANs? Do you want to elaborate on that, Micah? If you can hear me, if you're still with us. You're talking about the food GANs Mr. Kesh referenced at the end there, near the end of the last workshop? Okay, sorry, my mic is not on, he says. So you were talking about black holes, Alex, and this idea of creation. We always thought that the black holes were basically eating machines and that nothing at all came out of them. And of course, Mr. Kesh has corrected that point, even to the point of Stephen Hawking's changing his view. So can we now say a black hole has a tremendous amount of libido? Or this creation, as it actually takes things and turns them into other fields that can be used, and materials that can be used in the creation process, perhaps in an adjoining universe, or even back within, like a recycling system? Can we say a black hole has tremendous libido?
Mark, all of them have a tremendous libido. That is the universal law. So what we can say about this is that the energy of destruction, what I could reference as destrudo and mortido, these are used in psychology, and these are man-made, you see. So the whole debate on whether it's creation or destruction is the debate between plasma energy and physical energy. The black hole is the transition matter. So it is the converter. And if the Magravs condition is not strong enough, then, and it breaks up into extreme weakness, then it has to go into the black hole. And then from there, this is the point. The plasma energy flows in two directions, and it's always flowing. You can't stop it. So the notion of it going into the black hole and just being eaten up, and then what? You know that, when you eat, you still have to go to the washroom. So this is not a cut and dried thing where garbage goes in and garbage goes out. There's a transformation. So this just becomes the link. The black hole becomes the link. But between what? And so that becomes the link between two fields. And so if it becomes the link between two fields, the result is transparency.
Hey, may I interject here for a second about the black holes?
Hello.
The way Mr. Cash explains it, the black hole is not a physical entity. It's the black hole is the black hole condition, where so much matter with so much force accumulated in one point, so that all those fields balance each other out. So it goes into this balanced state of the transitional matter. So it turns, well, so to speak, invisible to our matter state, eyes and telescopes and so on. But it's not actually, as the traditional physics believed, one condensed point in space. There is still all those stars and whatever created the black hole condition in the first place circling around each other. And the condition can also um, for example, we've seen, and astrology has also seen that in the recent years now with the more modern telescopes, that suddenly black holes appear when two galaxies get close to each other in the area between the two galaxies. They suddenly appear, and then they will also disappear again. It's just an area of space where the overall energy, gravitational energy, is balancing each other out. So it's a condition. It's not a physical energy, it's a condition. And Mr. Keshe also in the labs in Iran in, I don't know, 2007 or something, they artificially created the black hole condition.
How about the idea, Daniel, that the black hole is very weak? And we know the rules of the plasma, the stronger feeds the weaker. Is it that strong that it's pulling everything into itself, or is it that weak that by the law of the plasma, the matters or energies that are stronger in that area automatically go in to feed the weaker? Just a thought you may want to address.
May I comment?
Anybody, this is a round table. No one has to ask permission.
Please do while I think.
Okay, well, first of all, your answer is correct. So you just basically paraphrased what I've said. And so we understand that the black hole is a temporary transparent condition. And so we understand that in a mag-grav condition that is transparent. And with respect to Mark's point, the black hole is highly gravitational. And the reason for it is because it's attracting. So it's you say, well, that's the higher energy. Yeah, but it's in a different dimension. You see, this is what we try and discuss today. When we look at this, for instance, when you look at this physicality of the sun and the earth is a manifestation of the plasma reality. So that plasma reality is not visible. That's what created this. You see, so this is what you've got to look at. If in order to create this physicality, you have to reduce the strength. So you reduce the strength from a higher dimension. So now that it's come to this physicality, to maintain this physicality, it has to absorb this energy. If it is absorbing this energy, then it is becoming more gravitational. So how far does it become gravitational? And this is what we're going to discuss next week, because what we're looking at is a different dimension, which we call inner space. And the inner space is of a higher dimension than the physical space of what we call Earth space. So although the Earth space is gravitational, in relationship to the inner space is gravitational. So it's a two-way street. And so when we look at how we go from one to another, we have to understand that it's not just between the magnetical and gravitational in the same dimension, but it's between the magnetical and gravitational on multiple dimensions. That's why we, as observers, we're not part of this physical dimension. That's not who we are. We're of another dimension. And now as we get to understand this, then we understand when we arrive, when we were born as a baby, and we want to leave this planet to go into outer space, supposedly, does that mean we have to retrograde to that of a baby or retrograde to that of a embryo? How far do we retrograde, right? So we want to travel as an adult, but we didn't come here as an adult. We came here as a baby. Okay, so that's where the conflict comes in, and that conflict is manifested in the limitations of this science that we understand today. So this is what we're trying to do, is to surpass these limitations, transcend these limitations, and understand that there are other dimensions. It's just that the way they operate, we have to have the faith, and you know that because the positions of the earth and the sun are changing, but you know what? So are the seasons. So the plants seem to understand that they go into suspended animation. We operate under a different set of rules in terms of our suspended animation. It's only restricted to when we sleep. But do we have to sleep in outer space? What about the plants? Where did they go? What about the bear when he sleeps? Where did he go? Well, I mean, what's he doing? He's still alive. Is he in a coma? And so we find that when we are in a coma, we have a reason to leave our physicality. We want to dispense with this physicality. Why? Because this place is, this is a nut house. We are destroying this planet. You know, if push comes to shove, you know, all of us need to leave. We're the first ones to go. You know, because we're the ones who are causing the problem.
You mentioned the bear, Alex. I was just thinking, wow, that soul must have a great time, because the bear is now lowering its magnetic fields for a big extended period. So it's slowing its heartbeat down. It's slowing everything way, way down. So the soul must be able to really go out into the universe for an extended time, not just 8 hours or 6 hours or 4 hours. And that's probably what the bear's soul is doing during that hibernation period.
Yeah, but not only that, he wants to come back in the spring.
And he does.
And he does. And these plants want to come back in the spring. Okay? But why do we go into a coma? Because, you know, we don't want to go. But if we commit suicide, it violates the universal law. So we're kind of sitting on the fence. Yeah, we want to go, but we don't want to go. You know what I mean?
Well, many people have woken up from comas after quite a number of years being in that condition. And they also say that even though they can't respond to you, or it looks like they're just sleeping, their hearing is seeing or hearing everything that's being discussed in their presence.
Yeah, but some of these patients go for years. So what we have done with the plasma science is we have reduced that term to less than 30 days. So this is proof of concept.
I'm not following you. I didn't follow that.
We've pulled people out of a coma in less
Okay.
than 30 days.
Yeah, Mr.
Is
Kesh
it-
has done that many, many, many times.
Well, and it's also a fact with the new body enhancement units. This is where we are doing this. We are doing this now. These new health centers that we're
Mhm.
planning on putting across, we will be doing that. What is the delay? Well, the delay is that there's still debates going on whether or not we should seek peace and prosperity or we should be happy with war and poverty. And so
Right.
that's
And
the
that's what he
inflection
mentioned.
point is coming.
That's what he mentioned in the last workshop, that someone who has the Parkinson's or the Alzheimer's, as we saw in the video in China, any physiologist or physiotherapist would say that arm cannot move that way. It's been frozen or in that position. I think he used the idea of a cast, that it's locked in position after so much time.
Right.
But
right.
he said, to any physiotherapist, this would be ludicrous. But he said, we're touching the soul of each cell, and therefore the physicality has to follow along.
And
So
if we're
it's
touching the
Yeah.
soul,
of each
right?
cell.
Yeah. So the soul of the man will want to return to the body and come out of the coma, won't he?
Well, I don't think the soul is gone. It can't be, or that would be the end of that person. The soul is still there. I don't think it
No,
departs.
I don't think so. I think it does depart because the body is in a state of suspended animation.
Okay.
The soul of the body is taking care of business. And there's a connection.
Okay, while I have it here, I just noticed when we concluded our elevation of that child, Diane has joined the group via invite link. Y also joined the group via invite link, and R. Greg has also joined the group via invite link. So thank you all. I know Diane is a Universal Council supporter, and if she'd like to share anything with us, you can feel free, but don't feel that you have to.
Now, I'd like to mention thanks to Diane for stepping up and being part of the support team for the Universal Council. I had a feeling that years ago when you joined the foundation that that would be one of your long-term goals, and then so congratulations on your accomplishment.
So Alex, do you think it was your emotion that created it, or the GANS knows, the fields realize that it's important to manifest if you give it the opportunity to? I know one time I had a request very sort of after dinner, and I didn't have any GANs really made at the time. I think it was Cup of Life 1. And I was sort of angry that, it came in so late, but the family needed it for the next day. I think it was from the Brazilian team. And so I put something together rather quickly, and I have never seen so much GANs. I mean, it was like snowing after maybe 40 minutes. I think I started at 10 p.m. at night. And
Okay, so you're telling me that you're a fourth confirmation.
Well, I don't know if it was because of my need. I said this has to be done.
No, I know, but you're confirming, you're the fourth confirmation in this session today who's confirming that you have GANs snowing in your reactor.
That was about 2.5 years ago that happened to me.
So there is a change. There's a change in the rate.
But I've made GANs after that, and it didn't respond that way. So whatever it was, the time, my emotions, the battery.
You had a
Something
strong
else.
intention to give.
Yes, I really think that could be part of it, because I said this must be done. They need it for tomorrow
It's
morning.
obviously that.
Yeah, and I can corroborate. I have two friends who have Cups of Life operating, and they totally dismayed that they can't produce GANs, or it's a very minimal amount of GANs, you know, in relationship to everything that, you know, if you go on the Brazilian Telegram, you can see everybody is producing a lot of GANs.
I just saw Mr. Kesh pop in and wink at us. If he comes back, shall we give him the floor?
You give it away, absolutely.
It may have just been a wink and a nod, just acknowledging that we're here.
If he wants to, I think sometimes he just wants to listen. Like don't force him to speak.
Oh,
if he
no,
just wants to
I
pop
don't
in to
try
listen.
to do that, but it is about 11:15 in Europe, so normally we try not to go past midnight, which is really extending, except Mr. Cash, because he seems to only sleep a couple hours a night, or 2 or 3 hours, so.
So I would like to just reinforce the notion here, as the gentleman has said, that, you know, your intention is part of it, and so you are also part of the process, and that process is not without some kind of connection to every other process that is going on. So you, as an inhabitant of Earth, have a sentimentality for Earth because you came here, and as such, you have a compassion for Earth, and as such, you have a connection. And you cannot just connect on one side because the Earth keeps rotating and you keep rotating with it. But the thing is, in the daytime it's sunny and at night it's dark. And so the conditions are changing, but it's all part of the same. So in other words, what we're saying is that the relationship on the Earth with respect to Mars and the Sun, which are two reference points, whether it's sunny or it's dark, that relationship is still there. And then all the souls on this planet, we are also still here. So there's a condition. And so we are responsive to that condition. And so this is what I'm talking about. You know, when you're in a coma, you no longer wish to be responsive. However, you don't want to violate the universal law of committing suicide. And then if you are brain dead, where you are committing, let's just say, breaking universal laws, how do you become connected? So the first thing is to understand that they are disconnected. So they are alive, they are functioning, but they're disconnected from the universal laws because the universal law will not do harm. So why is there harm on this planet? There has to be a disconnection. That's what this whole topic that I brought up today was about, this disconnection. So we are, with the plasma science, able to reattach this connection point. And we can do this by elevating the field strength. We need to be aware. Once we are aware, then we understand that we can be connected or reconnected, or we can be aware that we have always been connected. It's just that we haven't
There you
used it.
go.
Yeah, there you go. And so now what we're seeing, and today is a fabulous example with all the contributors today, you're finding that all the students here are surpassing the teacher.
Micah has put something into the chat. If we could all of us send elevation from our souls to Victor Weddle, I have been sharing knowledge and working with him to create new plasma wellness centers on a massive scale over the past year or so. His health is very poor, and he has been experiencing depression of possible kidney. No, let me start again. His health is very poor, and he has been experiencing depression from the diagnosis of possible kidney cancer. His soul wishes to live and work to help spread the plasma technology and help many others on the planet. So why don't we take a couple of minutes here and again collectively gather? We see a need has been manifest. So let's just take 2 minutes of silence and work on this issue through our collective souls. Shall we do that? Let's start.
Yes, let's do that.
Let's do that right now.
Mark, I have
Yes.
a question. If you're sending intentions and so on, I just want to remind myself, are we supposed to give something that is positive and not focus on the negative? Like, don't keep thinking about the cancer. Think about how it is when it's healthy.
I think
Because
if you just allow your soul to give, it will do the right work.
So in other words, we don't think about the problem itself, because that kind of manifests it manifests it more, but rather we give just the
Unconditionally from the soul.
and it will be taken as it is needed. Okay.
Mhm.
All right, thanks.
So let's take 2 minutes. Thank you all again. Maybe I'll just play a small part of the, let me share the screen again.